So let's dive right into the deep end, shall we? Today we're going to talk about the significance of coca leaves in traditional Indian culture. Now, when you think of coca leaves, you might automatically associate it with its infamous derivative, cocaine. But hold on to your horses because there's so much more to these leaves than just that. The coca leaf, my friends, has been an integral part of Andean culture for thousands of years. You heard that right. Thousands. It's not just a plant. It's a symbol deeply rooted in their history, traditions, and daily life. Imagine this. You're walking up the steep slopes of the Andes, struggling to catch your breath in the thin mountain air. Well, for the indigenous people, a handful of coca leaves would be their answer to combat that altitude sickness. They chew on these leaves, or brew them into tea, and voila. It helps them to adapt to high altitude conditions. But that's not all. It's also a sacred element in their spiritual rituals. They believe that the coca leaf is a divine gift from the gods, a bridge between the human world and the divine. In many ceremonies, coca leaves are offered to the Pachamama, which is the Andean Mother Earth, as a token of respect and gratitude. And let's not forget its medicinal use. The leaves are rich in nutrients, and they have been used to treat a variety of ailments, from wounds, fractures, to gastrointestinal issues. So it's clear as day that the coca leaf isn't just a crop or a raw material for a contentious drug. In the Andean culture, it's a lifeline, a spiritual conduit, and a natural pharmacy, all rolled into one. Now, isn't that something? But how this leaf turned into a global controversy, well, that's a whole different story. We'll get to that in a bit. Moving on, let's delve into the historical context of coca cultivation and its role in shaping South American economies and societies. Now, this is a story that's as old as time, well, at least as old as the Inca Empire, which is pretty darn old if you ask me. Coca cultivation has been a part of South America's agricultural landscape for centuries, dating back to pre-Columbian times. In the Inca Empire, the cultivation and consumption of coca were strictly controlled by the state. The leaves were revered, considered a gift from the gods, and were used for religious, medicinal, and practical purposes, as we've discussed earlier. Fast forward to the colonial period, the Spanish conquerors initially tried to eradicate coca cultivation, associating it with indigenous rituals and practices that they deemed pagan. But they quickly realized that coca was deeply woven into the fabric of Andean society, and more importantly, it was a valuable economic resource. So, instead of banning it, they ended up taxing it heavily. In more recent history, the 20th century saw a surge in demand for coca leaves, not for traditional uses, but for the production of cocaine. This led to a significant expansion of coca cultivation, especially in countries like Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. Well, this brought significant income to some farmers. It also brought a lot of trouble, from violent drug cartels to punitive government policies. Coca cultivation, therefore, has played a complex and double-edged role in South American societies. On one hand, it's a plant deeply ingrained in their culture and traditions, a source of livelihood for many families. On the other hand, it's also become a focal point of international drug policies, criminal networks, and conflict, which has had far-reaching impacts on these communities. Ah, the irony, isn't it? A plant that is seen as a sacred gift in one context and a cursed crop in another. But before we get too deep into that, let's first understand how this transformation from coca leaves to cocaine actually happens. Stay tuned. Alright, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. We're now going to discuss the transformation of coca leaves into cocaine. This is where things take a turn from traditional and spiritual to the infamous and controversial. First off, let's talk about the process. It's not exactly a home kitchen recipe, if you catch my drift.
The leaves of the coca plant are harvested and then soaked in gasoline or diesel fuel to extract the alkaloids.
This is followed by a series of chemical reactions and purification processes involving some seriously nasty stuff, like sulfuric acid, potassium permanganate, and hydrochloric acid. The end result, a white crystalline powder that we know as cocaine. Now, the actors involved in this process range from farmers who grow the coca plants, middlemen who procure the leaves, lab workers who process the leaves into cocaine, and finally the drug traffickers who smuggle the final product across borders. It's a long and risky chain that involves a lot of people, many of whom are driven to this by poverty and lack of alternatives. Let's not forget the implications for the global drug trade. Cocaine has become a major commodity in the illicit drug market, with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime estimating that the global cocaine trade is worth about $85 billion a year. That's no small change, folks. But this lucrative trade comes with an enormous human cost. It fuels violence, corruption, and instability in many parts of the world, especially in the major cocaine-producing countries in South America. It's a cycle of crime and punishment where the poorest often pay the highest price. In summary, the journey from coca leaves to cocaine is a complex and controversial one, with far-reaching implications for societies and economies on a global scale. It's a story of exploitation, crime, and tragedy, woven around a plant that is, at its roots, a deeply revered part of Andean culture. Quite the paradox, wouldn't you say?
But this is just one side of the coin.
And there's a whole other side of this story that often gets overlooked in the global debate. And that's what we're going to explore next. So, stay with me. All right, let's dive deeper into the stormy seas of controversy that surround coca leaves and cocaine. Now, this is a debate that has been raging for decades, involving governments, international organizations, scientists, and of course, the communities that grow and consume coca. First up, the legality. Coca leaves in their natural form are legal in many South American countries, where they are part of traditional practices and lifestyles. However, the moment these leaves cross the border, they're often considered illegal because they can be used to produce cocaine. Then there's the health impact. I'm sure you've heard the stories. Cocaine is highly addictive. It can damage your brain, heart, and other organs, and it can even lead to fatal overdoses. But what about coca leaves? Well, they contain a fraction of the alkaloid present in cocaine, and when chewed or brewed as tea, they don't have the same addictive or harmful effects. In fact, they're often used to combat hunger, fatigue, and a host of other ailments. Next, we have the societal consequences. The global war on drugs, with its focus on eradicating coca cultivation and punishing cocaine use, has had dire impacts on many communities. Farmers, who depend on coca for their livelihood, have been left impoverished. And people who use cocaine, instead of being treated for their addiction, are often stigmatized and criminalized. This war on drugs, some argue, has failed to curb the cocaine trade or reduce addiction rates. Instead, it has exacerbated violence, social inequality, and public health crises. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that cocaine is not a problem. It is, and it's a big one. But the way we're addressing this problem, by waging a war on a plant, and the people who grow and consume it, well, that's where the real controversy lies. But don't lose hope yet. There are efforts underway to rethink this approach and find more balanced, humane, and effective solutions. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So stick around. Now, let's turn our attention to the efforts and strategies employed by international organizations and governments to regulate coca cultivation and cocaine production. This is where we dive into policy, politics, and power dynamics. Are you ready? The primary international framework for drug control is the United Nations Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, adopted back in 1961. It classifies coca leaf as a Schedule I drug, which means it's subject to the same level of control as cocaine and heroin. But remember, this is a plant that has been used traditionally for centuries and is still legal and culturally significant in many parts of South America. Quite a conundrum, isn't it? Now, on the national level, countries like Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia have used a mix of strategies to tackle this issue. These range from forced eradication of coca crops to alternative development programs that encourage farmers to switch to other crops, to law enforcement efforts to dismantle drug trafficking networks. Have these efforts been successful? Well, depends on how you look at it. Yes, they have led to the seizure of tons of cocaine and the arrest of many traffickers. But they have also led to violence, displacement, and economic hardship for many communities that depend on coca for their livelihood. Not to mention, despite all these efforts, the global cocaine market is still thriving. Now, in recent years, there's been a shift in some quarters towards a more balanced and human rights-based approach. This includes initiatives like coca industrialization in Bolivia, where the government is promoting the legal and controlled use of coca for products like tea, flour, and cosmetics. The idea is to differentiate between the traditional and beneficial use of coca leaves and the harmful use of its derivative, cocaine. It's a challenging path, fraught with political, legal, and social hurdles. But many believe that it's a more just and effective way to address the complexities of the coca-cocaine conundrum. In conclusion, the story of coca leaves and cocaine is a tale of tradition, exploitation, and controversy. It's a tale that forces us to question our approaches to drug policy and to search for solutions that respect cultural practices, uphold human rights, and effectively address the challenges of drug abuse and trafficking. And that, my friends, is a conversation worth continuing. So let's keep talking. Let's keep learning. Let's keep questioning. Until next time.